Ever feel like you're just drowning in AI research papers? You just want the core ideas, right? The stuff that really matters, explained clearly, no jargon overload.
Yeah, totally.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Think of this as your shortcut to getting well-informed, and especially for you, the learner, if you're someone who really values those quick but, solid insights.
Those aha moments.
Exactly, those moments where it just clicks without feeling buried. And today we've got a really fascinating piece of research to dig into.
Absolutely. We're diving into a new kind of AI architecture. It's called a continuous thought machine, or
Yeah.
CTM for short. It comes from this paper, 2505.055222v1.pdf.
Right.
And our goal really is to pull out the crucial ideas. How does this CTM thing aim to bridge that, well, it's still a pretty big gap between AI today
Yeah.
and like human-like intelligence?
Exactly. The learner, you sent us some pretty dense stuff, which is great. But we're here to sort of be your guides, right? To unpack the most important bits, the really interesting aspects of this CTM.
Make it make sense.
Yeah, so you get what it's about and why it might actually be a big deal. Okay, so where do we start?
Current AI seems pretty good already, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. I mean, current AI is undeniably impressive. We see it doing amazing things in, well, loads of practical areas, no question. But the researchers behind CTM, they point out some pretty fundamental differences when you actually compare it to how human intelligence seems to work.
Right, like AI can't beat the best Go player. It can recognize millions of images, but it still struggles with things that just feel intuitive to us, you know? Like if a self-driving car sees a weird obstacle it's never encountered, does it just freeze? Or does it figure it out?
That's a perfect example of the limitations. Today's AI often lacks that flexibility.
Yeah,
And it needs huge amounts of data, right? It's really data inefficient sometimes.
totally.
And crucially, it struggles to generalize. That kind of mental agility we have, applying knowledge from one thing to another slightly different thing, AI finds that much, much harder. And it doesn't really learn continuously, does it, like we do? Yeah. Adapting on the fly as the world changes. Plus, and this is a big one for me, where's the common sense?
Right.
Where's the AI that just gets things? Or can, actually explain why it did something in a way that makes sense?
These are precisely the challenges the research focuses on.
Yeah.
That lack of common sense, problems understanding relationships between concepts, ontological reasoning, the transparency issue, weak generalization, they're all big hurdles.
Yeah.
And the core argument, the central thesis of this paper, is that to really get AI to human-level intelligence, maybe even beyond, we need to make time a fundamental part of how it works.
Time.
Sure.
Huh, that really resonates. I mean, our brains don't just compute instantly, do they? Thinking unfolds, it's sequences, rhythms.
Exactly.
So I'm really curious now, how does this continuous thought machine actually do that? How does it bring time into AI?
Okay, so the CTM, it's a neural network architecture, but it's designed specifically right from the ground up to incorporate neural timing. And it does this through two main innovations. The first one is called a decoupled internal dimension.
Decoupled internal dimension. Okay,
Okay.
break that down for us. What's the core idea there?
Right, so imagine like a space inside the network where thought can unfold over time. Traditional recurrent networks, like LSTMs, they have internal states too, but they're mostly focused on processing sequential data, like one word after another. The CTM uses its recurrence differently. It uses it to actively build and manipulate patterns of neural activity, almost like refining an idea over these discrete internal steps they call ticks.
Ticks. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not just reacting to the next input. It's kind of having an internal process, building understanding step by step.
Precisely. It's like internal thinking time. And this ties into biology. The researchers connected to how the precise timing of signals between neurons in our brains is absolutely critical for computation. It's a pretty big shift.
Okay, that's cool. An internal space where things evolve over these ticks. What was the second innovation?
The second key idea is neuron-level models, or NLMs. Think of these as giving each individual neuron, well, almost its own little internal model.
Its own model for every neuron.
Yeah, instead of just a simple on-off switch like, say, ReLU, which is common.
Right.
Each CTM neuron has its own internal weights, its own settings. And these internal weights process a history of the signals coming into that neuron. They call these pre-activations.
A history, so it remembers what signals it got recently.
Exactly. It looks at that recent history to decide how it should activate next, its post-activation. So neuron's response isn't just based on the immediate input, but on a short memory trace.
Okay.
And this, they argue, leads to much more variable, complex, dynamic neural activity than you get with those simpler static activation functions.
So recap, internal thinking space evolving in steps or ticks, and neurons that react based on a history of signals using their own little models. That's the core.
Hmm.
Okay, how do these pieces actually fit together, like under the hood, simplified?
Absolutely. Figure 1 in the paper gives a pretty good visual. It starts with the synapse model. Think of the connections between neurons.
Okay, the synapses.
Right. Here, they're not just simple wires. They actually do some processing themselves. The model figures out the initial signal strength between neurons, the pre-activation. They even tried making these synapse models more complex, like little MLPs or even UNets,
Wow.
and found that more complex connections actually help performance. Suggests even the communication needs sophistication.
Okay, so connections do some work. Then the signals arrive at the neuron.
Yep. And each neuron keeps that history of pre-activations. We talked about a little memory buffer of recent incoming signals.
Got it.
That history gets fed into the neuron's neuron-level model. It's NLM.
The neuron's mini brain.
Kind of, yeah. And the NLM uses that history to generate the neuron's output, its post-activation.
Okay, pre-activations come in, neuron processes using history via its NLM sends out post-activation. Makes sense? What happens with those outgoing signals, the post-activations?
Good question. Just like the incoming ones, a history of post-activations is also kept for each neuron. And this history is used to calculate something really interesting. A synchronization matrix.
Synchronization matrix. What does that capture?
Basically, it measures which neurons tend to fire together or be active together over that recent history. It's looking at the coordination patterns.
Fire together, wire together kind of thing, like Hebbian learning.
It has that flavor, yeah. It's capturing the dynamic relationships, the synchrony, between neurons based on their recent activity.
Cool. But that matrix must get huge if you have lots of neurons, right? Comparing every pair.
It absolutely can. So to manage the scale, they use neuron pairing, which is basically a form of subsampling. They might randomly select a subset of neuron pairs to compute the synchronization for.
Ah, okay. So not every single pair, just a representative sample.
Exactly. And this process yields what they call latent representations. Think of it as distilling the key information about the network's synchronization state.
Right. And what are these latent representations used for?
Two main things. First, to generate the final output of the CPM for whatever task it's doing. Second, to modulate the network's attention, specifically using cross-attention to help it focus on the most relevant parts of the input data, guided by that synchronization info.
Okay.
And crucially, this whole cycle synapse model, pre-activation history, NLMs, post-activation history, synchronization matrix, latent representation, output tension it repeats, it iterates over those internal ticks.
Those thought steps.
Right.
The paper has that code snippet too, listing one.
Right.
It shows the flow, encode input, use synchronization for attention, synapse processing, NLMs do their thing, compute synchronization again, project an output. It's like this internal computational loop.
Precisely. And it's this iterative process running over multiple ticks that allows the CTM to think, to process information over time, potentially reaching a deeper or more refined understanding.
It's not just one shot, it's an evolving process. Now, about those internal ticks, how does it decide how many steps to take? Does it just run for like 50 ticks every time?
Ah, that's one of the really clever parts of the design. The way they train it, using a specific loss function, it's in section 2.5, and listing 4, it kind of learns to adapt. It doesn't have a fixed number of ticks imposed on it.
No fixed limit. How does that work?
Well, the training process looks at the CPM's performance across the entire sequence of internal ticks. For any given input, it considers the output at tick 1, tick 2, tick 3, and so on.
Okay.
And then it dynamically combines information, focusing on the point where the CTM is both most accurate and most certain about its prediction. Certainty here is like the model's confidence score.
Ah, okay. So it looks for the sweet spot within its own thinking process where it gets the right answer and feels confident about it. What's the benefit of doing that?
Quite a few, actually. First, it encourages the model to develop meaningful representations throughout its internal processing, not just cramming everything into the final step.
Right.
Second, it seems to facilitate a kind of natural curriculum learning. Easier examples might get solved quickly in fewer ticks, while harder ones might need more thinking time, at least initially. And third, and this is really interesting, it leads to adaptive computation. The CTM can potentially spend more computational effort, more ticks on harder inputs, and less on easier ones.
Adaptive compute, yeah, that's a hot topic. So it adjusts its own effort based on difficulty automatically.
Kind of, yeah. It emerges from the training process. The researchers call it an inductive bias. The model is biased towards adapting its processing complexity to the data's complexity. It feels much more, well, natural, doesn't it? Like how we might ponder a tricky question longer.
Yeah, definitely. It's like it knows when to think harder. Okay, theory sounds great, very biologically inspired. But does it actually work? Did they show good
Well, he
results?
did. They tested it on a really wide range of tasks, which is good to see. Let's start with the big one, ImageNet 1K classification.
Okay, standard image recognition benchmark. How to do?
They used a ResNet 152 backbone to get image features and then put the CTM on top for the dynamic processing. They reported about 72.5% top 1 accuracy and nearly 90% top 5.
Which is okay, but maybe not state of the art on ImageNet.
Correct. And they're upfront about that. It's not breaking ImageNet records yet. But, and this is the key point they make, it's the first time anyone's really applied this kind of neural dynamics approach, focusing on timing and internal processing, to a task of that scale and complexity.
Ah, so it's a proof of concept on a major benchmark, showing the potential.
Exactly. And the really interesting stuff comes when they analyze that thought dimension, how things change over the internal ticks. Figures 2 and 3 show that the model's certainty, its confidence, generally increases over ticks,
Right.
which directly supports that adaptive compute idea. You could potentially stop the processing early if it hits a high certainty level, saving compute power.
Makes sense.
They also found that using that certainty information actually helped improve the final prediction accuracy, especially after a few ticks. And importantly, the CTM's probability estimates were well calibrated.
Meaning if it says 80% confident, it's right about 80% of the time.
Pretty much, yeah, which is really useful. And looking inside, Figure 4 shows these really diverse, structured patterns of activity unfolding over time.
Yeah.
That's the basis of its representation.
And the demos. Figure 5.
Oh, yeah, those are cool. They visualize the CTM's attention. You can see it sort of smoothly shifting focus across important parts of the image as it thinks, as it goes through the ticks, and its confidence grows as it does so.
Like it's scanning the image, figuring it out. Okay, very interesting. What else did they try?
They moved to something completely different, 2D mazes. This was designed to require sequential reasoning, like planning a path.
Okay.
And they made it tricky. The CTM had to output a sequence of steps, and they didn't give it positional embeddings, no built-in coordinates. It had to learn the spatial layout itself.
Wow, so it had to build its own internal map.
Essentially, yes.
Right.
And Figure 7 shows it dramatically outperformed standard LSTMs and feed-forward networks. It got much higher accuracy and didn't just memorize the training mazes. It seemed to generalize better.
And the demos. Figure 8.
Yeah, you see its attention moving methodically along a plausible path, even on unseen mazes or paths longer than it was trained for. It suggests it learned a general procedure, not just specific routes.
Yeah.
You talk about episodic future thinking, like it's imagining the steps ahead.
That's really impressive. It sounds like it's actually reasoning about the maze.
It really does seem that way. And it generalized to bigger mazes too, Figure 9. They suggest it's better at building these internal world models or cognitive maps.
Okay, what about other benchmarks? Like CFAR 10?
Yep, they did CFAR 10. Compared it to humans, FF, and LSTM baselines, Figure 10 shows it performed competitively on accuracy.
Huh?
Again, had really good calibration, sometimes even better than the human estimates they collected.
Interesting.
They also tested on harder, corrupted images, CFAR 10D, Figure 11, and looked at how uncertainty changed with difficulty, comparing it to humans and LSTMs. And Figure 12 visually shows the CTM's internal neural activity looks more complex and dynamic than the LSTMs on this task.
So consistent patterns across different tasks. Dynamics, calibration, handling difficulty.
Pretty much. They also tried sorting numbers sequentially. Section 7, computing parity. Section 8, where accuracy improved with more thinking time, and it learned different strategies, Figure 20. There was a Q&A M&A task, Section 9, showing it could recognize digits, remember sequences, and do simple math based on them.
Wow.
And even reinforcement learning, Section 10. They applied it to classic control problems and grid world navigation of partially observable settings, maintaining the neural dynamics across environment steps. Performance was comparable to LSTMs, Figure 27, but again, the internal dynamics looked richer, Figure 28.
That's a heck of a range. And they did ablation studies, too.
Briefly, yes. Section 6 looks at how things like the number of neurons or the number of internal ticks affect performance and the diversity of the internal activity, Figures 13 and 14, providing more insight into the architecture's properties.
Okay, so zooming out again, taking all these results together, what are the bigger picture implications here? Where might this lead?
Well, the researchers tie it back to that initial motivation, getting closer to human-like intelligence through temporal processing. They talk about the intuitive perspective, section 12.1, how the CTM building up its answer over time feels more like how we reason compared to an instant output.
Yeah, that makes sense. It feels less like a black box.
Exactly. And they sketch out some really exciting future directions. Could the synchronization patterns act as a form of memory? Could the Hebbian-like nature of synchronization allow for different kinds of learning, maybe even without gradients? Could the very large space of possible synchronization patterns be useful for handling multiple types of data, like vision and language, together? And could they train these models more naturally on continuous streams of data? Lots of open questions.
Yeah.
They also mentioned some early attempts that didn't quite work, and how discovering the importance of the synchronization matrix was key.
It really sounds like they've opened up a new avenue for AI research.
I think so. The CTM is a really novel approach, making neural dynamics, how activity changes over time, a central part of the representation. That's quite different. It offers a glimpse into, well, maybe a different path towards AI, one inspired more directly by the temporal nature of biology.
Okay, so for the learner, the key takeaways are this continuous thought machine makes time and neural dynamics fundamental. It's not just about the final answer, but the process over internal ticks.
Right, using things like neuron-level models and synchronization.
Which leads to interesting abilities, adaptive compute, better generalization on some tasks like mazes, good calibration, complex internal states across a really diverse set of problems.
Even if it's not beating every single benchmark yet, the potential is clear.
It's definitely early days, but it's a super intriguing new way to think about building AI.
Absolutely. It highlights that maybe just scaling up current models isn't the only way. Maybe looking at how computation unfolds over time is just as important.
This has been a really fascinating deep dive. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Could the secret to truly flexible, adaptable AI lie not just in more data or, bigger models, but in fundamentally changing how we allow those models to process information over time?
It's a powerful question.
Definitely something to think about. If you want to dig deeper yourself, you can find the original paper, 2505.05522v1.pdf, online. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.